Wow, we are live and direct as ever on a Wednesday afternoon. This is the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. The legendino Tim Vickery is always with us. Of course, it's his podcast as much as anything else. He's in Rio, looking a little bit too cash for a weekly podcast, Tim, if I might say so. Usually you are the very essence of dedicated follower of fashions, but you seem to have let the side down today. Why?
No, this is a piece of Italian knitwear. It is.
So if it was Nigerian, it wouldn't have the same cachet, would it?
None whatsoever.
Yeah,
but it is kind of Riviera late 50s vibe. So I'm sticking by it. I think it's cash but acceptable.
You see, I thought you dressed appropriately for the conversation we're going to have about, I suppose, one of the dirtiest games of football.
I'd have to wear chain armor to dress appropriately for this game.
And even that might not save you, because we're talking about a match, as we always do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. We reflect on a match, an iconic match, often enough, from the past, to sort of look through or look back at it through modern eyes. And I'm delighted to say that we've got with us today, joining us, Chris Hylland, who's the author of Dame Bola, A Journey Through the Language of Argentine Football. And oh, did I pronounce it wrongly? Is that why you laugh your head off? I knew it. Go on then.
There was a bit of a risk with there was a bit of a risk choosing that title, and you're not the first one to have stumbled at that, but you got the surname perfect. So
damn it, it should be Dame Bola.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me the ball. Give me the ball. Or sorry, get the kids out of the. As Ray Wilkins once said, when England were on tour playing in Uruguay in 1984, live on British TV when the ball went out of play, he wandered over to the sideline and he yelled at this poor unsuspecting Uruguayan ball boy, "Give me the fucking ball!" That's what Chris's book is all about.
It's an alternative title, an alternative option.
Yeah, Nigerians should know how to spell or pronounce the last part, except it would be Bola in Nigeria, because that's the Nigerian name, Bola. It's quite a common Nigerian name as well. So at least I didn't go for Dame Bola, because Dame Bola would be a lady who'd gotten a gong from Her Majesty at some point or other. So what does it mean then, Dame Bola, first of all, Chris?
As Tim says, it means the literal meaning is to give me the ball, pass me the ball. So in a football context, bola is a ball, dame to give me, or give me the ball as an imperative. But as a metaphor, it means something completely different, or it can be used in many different contexts. And part of the book has metaphors that come from the world of football, that are used in everyday situations. And Argentina seems to have so many more than certainly we have in English, and in Norwegian you can tell me about Swedish and other languages. But that's the thing that caught my attention initially, is just how many metaphors there are used that come from the world of football in everyday situations there in Argentina.
Where does that come from, Tim? Is there a historical context to that?
It's a football republic. We have exactly the same expression in Portuguese, give me the ball, and if you, for example, had an fascination, and you're telling your mate about it the next day, she didn't give you the ball. Didn't happen, Didn't happen. You didn't go to the ball, as Marvin Gaye might have sung. But on football, it's so important to these places, and Argentina is sometimes, it does come across as a footballing republic, which makes it very, very serious, which makes winning and losing a serious business. And I think that's part of the story that Chris is with us here today to tell.
Yeah, we're looking at the game from 22nd of October 1969. This is Estudiantes of Argentina versus Milan, and it's in the Intercontinental Cup second leg. Am I right?
Yeah, champions of Europe, champions of South America. It's at the time, it's more thought of as a world, because at the time, who else is there apart from Europe and South America? So this is an annual contest that started in the early 60s. Europe has its European Cup. South America, in retaliation, has its Copa Libertadores, and the two champions meet home and away for the title of the best club side in the world. And it started off very well, and it was really, really interesting. when this game happens, it's already on the downward curve. But in one respect, we get lucky this time, because this is the first time that it's going to be decided on aggregate. Any previous case, you win one, I win one, we have a third game. Doesn't matter what the scoreline is. But this time, this is the first time that it's going to be done on aggregate, which obviously makes a huge difference to our story, because the first match in Italy on the 8th of October, Milan win 3-0. So now it's not good enough for Estudiantes to win by any score and force a third game, which would be in South America because everyone's there. Now they've got to try and overturn this three-goal shellacking that they took on the 8th of October.
And is that where the drama begins for you, Chris?
I think the drama begins in the second half, because even the first half, when I watched it back, and I have to say it's probably the first time I've watched a game from that era in full, and that was an interesting aspect of the game in and of itself. But clearly, I think maybe it's that kind of will to win, the disappointment, the frustration of not winning, which, as Tim said, being a football republic, winning and losing is everything, or losing is not everything. Winning certainly is everything. And when you lose, they tend to get a little bit, let's say, they want to show a masculine, a macho side. And that's what comes out in the second half, because the first half wasn't that, but I mean, okay, there were some incidents, but it all kicked off in the second half.
Yeah, and kicked off.
May well come back and kicked off.
Yeah. So it may well come back and what?
It may well be the reason why it kicked off is that they saw the game had gone, and therefore they wanted to show the other side, which is welcome to Argentina.
But I know you say that I always do this. The Welcome to Argentina, I think, is a headline, but I always sort of reference, I can't help but reference a Shakespearean tragedy, as it were, because all the circumstances are there, as Tim laid out. You know, this game that is, for those who haven't seen it, trust me, go and watch it on YouTube. I can't decide sometimes if, you know, Bruce Lee should be starring in it, but he wouldn't have felt out of place, I can tell you that. Anyway, but because of the preamble, as it were, we enter the play at the point that Iago is saying, look, this bloke here, I'm going to get him. He went and stole the woman of my dreams from me. He's become my boss, even though I'm better than him. And calamity of calamities, he's black and all. You know, that's the point where the drama starts. And if it hadn't been, it's important, Tim, because if it hadn't been for all those individual circumstances, Iago and Othello would have been best mates.
It could be the case that Nestor Combin, the player for AC Milan, is the character here that maybe antagonize. I don't want to antagonize the Argentinians, the Argentinian born but French nationalized, and he's one of the main protagonists in the story as we go through. But he was certainly one of the players that they were after, it would seem.
So what happens? Maybe the Othello comparison is perhaps interesting, although obviously I know nothing about the play other than what I've gleaned from you over the years, because the champions of Europe against the champions of South America, and the champions of Europe, the Milan, it's a massive, massive team. Estudiantes are not. This is where maybe the Othello thing comes in. You know, the Argentine Football Republic, it's all based in the capital city, Buenos Aires. That's where all the big teams are from. They've only just had the idea of playing a championship which involves those provinces, you know, outside Buenos Aires. And Estudiantes, it's a little team from La Plata. Now, La Plata, it's about an hour outside Buenos Aires. It's a little team. You know, they're not one of the giants. Never even been champions of Argentina. And here they are, champions of South America. And quite a few of the things I think we're going to talk about are kind of international, because you could make a comparison between Estudiantes and Leeds United, who are coming through at the same time in England. because Leeds could play, but no one enjoyed ever playing them. You know, they were tough. They were a tough team, and they took that word professional to mean that they were going to apply themselves to win any way possible. And Estudiantes were very, very much like that. It's a little team, workmanlike, who are applying themselves. They're doing things that hadn't really been thought of before, like dossiers on the opposition, just like Don Revie did with Leeds. You know, do these massive dossiers. Estudiantes studied the opposition, both technically and psychologically, for weak points. But things on the field as well, like set pieces. They paid a lot of attention to set pieces, and they were one of the first clubs to do them with the wrong foot. You know, corners and free kicks on the right side by a left footer and vice versa. So it was really, really studied. I mean, the coach, Zubeldia, a serious coach, and he's a bit like Revie as well. He was a player. He was a good player. He was an inside forward. He didn't have a lot of pace, so he's got to think about things a little bit more. And Revie was a kind of deep-lying centre forward, and ultra serious and professional. And after Estudiantes, he practically starts Colombian football, Zubeldia, because he goes up to Colombia. No, they haven't got all the rich foreigners anymore. They've only got Colombians, and he just forces them to be serious. Siesta, not on my watch. Get out there and train. And so they're this little club who've worked their way up based on an esprit de corps and taking it to the limit. Just as people said with Leeds, you know, when you got a throw in against Leeds, everyone's marked. What on earth are you going to do with it? No, Eamon Dunphy writes about this in Only a Game, the diary that he wrote as a Millwall player in the mid-70s. According to the rules, you've won a throw-in, but you're up against Leeds and there's no one to give the ball to because they've marked. You know, they've marked everyone. They just make it really hard to play against. And Estudiantes were really, really hard to play against.
Well, is that enough? Don't ask me about Shakespeare. One of the phrases in the book, and a lot of the phrases are to do with the concepts of Argentinian football in general. And one of the phrases which you've spoken about here and on the World Football Phone-In before is anti-futbol. And before that, it was a romantic, free-flowing, no dossiers, no tactics, maybe a lot of siestas under, the old guard. And then in 1958, they lost 6-1 to Czechoslovakia, and Argentinian football took a turn for the ugly, but also a lot more of the discipline, as Tim says, the dossiers, the tactical training. And they could play. I mean, they could play relatively nice football, but it did get quite ugly too. Estudiantes' nickname is the rat stabbers, La Pincha Rata. And that comes from the fact that they're students of medicine. So that makes sense. Estudiantes students.
Yeah.
But Carlos Bilardo, who then went on to become the manager of Argentina and won the World Cup in 1986, there were rumours, conspiracy theories maybe, that he would take pins onto the pitch and stab opponents at corners. So the idea of Pincha Rata being the rat stabbers, they would actually then do that. He did a TV commercial in the 2000s for vaccines. Well, actually, it was a diabetes test, and they played on the fact that he had that reputation. Not only him, but his team, the Estudiantes team of the 60s and 70s, had the reputation for bringing, let's say, things onto the pitch to distract the opponent. And that's anti-football in a nutshell. And there are lots of phrases in the book that are related to this form of football, the form of football that dominated Argentinian football between 58 and around 1970, when El Flaco Menotti began his coaching career. And actually, whose birthday was it on the 22nd of October? Menotti. So Menotti, it's funny to think that Menotti was sitting at home enjoying a glass of wine. He was playing in Brazil, I believe, at the time, Tim. And watching a form of football that he really did not appreciate.
He saw it as a treason to the values of Argentina. But you're talking about Bilardo actually making money from this reputation from taking a pin out into the field, and so many of them would almost glorify this reputation. it's not something to be ashamed of. It's, you know, it just shows how sharp we were. You know, we were. You know, you'd rather go down in history as someone who did that than someone who's a weak loser.
Yeah. Given that Dame Bola is a book about very much about language, do we not have to go back further in time, as you do in the book, to maybe the origins of Argentina, which is a relatively young country, to explain? Because despite the fact that we're talking about a particularly violent game in 1969, Argentinian footballers have got a reputation, as you know, there's no argument. As skillful as everything is, many of us will remember World Cup encounters with Argentina when England were the opponents. And, we of course, being Anglo-Saxon Protestants, we don't play dirty, not even if it's against Maradona, of course not. We play by the letter of the law, which is, of course, English rules. We play an English gentleman's game. However, the Argentinians have this reputation of being rough and ready to play football. In fact, part of what you tell me, there was one particularly innocuous incident, it seemed like, when the Inter Milan, I can't remember, the Milan player went past the Argentinian defender, and the Argentinian defender, the Estudiantes defender, just quite casually, as a guy went past, put him in a headlock. Just cupped his neck into his arm, into a headlock, and he's carried on with his business. But they have that reputation. Can we go back then, maybe, to the early beginnings of football? Does that inform us at all as to how Argentinians play football and the language of Argentinian football today?
I would say it's the other way around, because they came up against much bigger Brits who were playing a very physical form of football at the beginning. So actually, the Argentinian style of football that Menotti romanticized and that came before this period of violence, because you referred to the 1966 game, that was in that period of ultra defensive anti-futbol, as they call it. But actually, at the beginning, they had to develop a style of football that took the ball away from the physics. They didn't want the long ball and a heading game. So they developed an individualistic style of dribbling, short passes, get around the players. And that was very successful. In fact, Italy, who had in 1926, under Mussolini, banned foreign players, wanted Argentinian players. They said, but these Italo-Argentinians, they're not foreign, they're Italian, they can come over, because they offered something very different to the style of football in Italy at the time. In terms of the language, there's a lot of English vocabulary at the beginning of the Argentinian game. The rules were in English. The players obviously spoke about the game. The referees administered the game in English. And a lot of those English words stuck, and they were essentially used in a Spanish accent. So it's the English word, but said in Spanish and then written down accordingly. So it does make for quite humorous vocabulary at the beginning. And some of those words have stuck simply for the romantic. If you watch football with your grandfather would have been using some of those pieces of vocabulary. So it's that kind of romantic way of looking to the past.
That's
and then that language develops.
Most of that has gone in Brazil now, unfortunately. But when I arrived here, you could still see people referring to a defender, a back, as a Becky. It was spelt Beque, Becky. I think that's brilliant.
A full Becky, or a left Becky, or a right Becky.
But my Portuguese is not very good, but they still say time, and that's spelled Time, right? So that almost definitely comes from the English word team, but it's spelled time in English.
And they all still say go.
They do. But they don't like that goal going into their net. And what this story is all about is the disgrace of losing, and why do you think? Because Zubeldia, the coach, he's a serious coach, very, very good coach, and he's presiding over this what has become in this game just a rabble. And his kind of excuse is, well, we're only a little club. We haven't been buying in any players because we're champions of South America. We're playing lots of friendlies and we're tired. We can't compete on an even playing field at the moment. So we have to. We got to resort to this kind of stuff. And to which the obvious answer is, well, why can't you just lose to the better side and then, have a drink afterwards? But defeat is such a powerful thing. I think it's far, far more serious for them than it is for us in our culture. What do you think about this, Chris? Do you agree with me, and why?
It's difficult not to agree with you, Tim. But you've lived in South America, and we've spoken, actually, you and I have spoken about this before, and you've spoken about it on the radio, that losing for Argentinians, and we can extend this to people in poor countries in general, that you feel like you're losing in every aspect of society. There's corruption, dictatorship, violence, poverty, etc. The one place you feel that you have a little bit of control is when you go to the football stadium. And in Argentina, more than anything, there's the concept of aguante, which is you don't turn up to be entertained. You turn up to push your team over the line. And el aguante is a very Argentinian concept. Losing, therefore, is that's the last place that you want to lose, because you felt like you've lost in every other aspect of society. So they take it very seriously. And winning there, being a loser in a macho society is also obviously takes away from that status of being a man. And I like to think that's not the case so much nowadays. It's still prevalent to some extent, but we're talking about a hyper macho era.
And one of the things, it's something that you identify in your book, is that the fans, if their team is being beaten to a humiliating degree, it's almost like a badge of honor to prevent the game from reaching the final whistle.
Yeah. Abandonar, and the idea of abandoning a game, or having a game abandoned, suspended initially, but then abandoned, it comes about when your team's getting a tonking, as we would say in English. I mean, if you're getting embarrassed, and actually in Estudiantes beat their rivals 7-0, Gimnasia, from the same town of La Plata, beat them 7-0 in 2006. When I went back at the end of 2023 to do research for this book, the Clásico had just been, and the Estudiantes fans had a big banner with the number 7. That's all it said. Big banner with the number 7. And that was deemed to be provocative. I mean, that was banned. And then you're not allowed as a River Plate fan to bring in banners referencing the day that they beat Boca Juniors in the 2018 final. Because there are no away fans anymore to react to these kind of provocations. But that's seen as far too embarrassing even to bring it up anymore. That was a bit of an odd thing for me, because they're more than happy to embarrass them, the opponent on the pitch. In the office the next week, they're going to embarrass their colleagues who are supporting the other team. But to have a big banner of the number 7 in that context was too far. That was far too far. Don't bring it up again.
And isn't this such a huge cultural difference? And there are quite a lot of things, I think, in common between Argentine football culture and English football culture. But in that just unlimited passion, there's no humor in defeat. There's no, we're so shit, it's unbelievable, or let's pretend we scored a goal. There's none of that,
I don't sing along to those ones, mate. I don't know about you. That's a moment of embarrassment for all fans, I think. So one word that I'm pleased to see that they've kept in the vocabulary of Argentinian football is referee. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we've got to ask the obvious question: where was the referee in this match in October 1969?
He was very criticised, actually, by the commentators on the match that I watched. The Argentinian commentators were very critical of him. I thought that actually in the first half he was giving a lot of soft fouls, and maybe thinking that I'll set the standard, because knowing the reputation of Estudiantes, maybe something had gone on in Italy. I haven't watched the first leg. Maybe something went on in Italy that he felt that he should be aware of, the Chilean referee. But as it was kicking off in the second half, the commentator said, well, we're being as objective as we can. We want the Argentinian team to win, but he should have sent 3 or 4 players off at this moment, and including Estudiantes players, the commentator said. And they were quite critical of him. So I think when Estudiantes resort to such violence and the tactic, whether they had pins to stab in this particular game, I don't know. But when that is the rule book or the playbook, it's kind of a thankless task anyway, I think.
Yeah, and who would want to, watching this game, who would want to be a referee? When the wind goes out the sails when Milan take the lead, don't they? And another thing that Estudiantes did was squeeze the play. Squeeze the play, but there's a space behind, and obviously if you get in the space behind, and Milan did get in the space behind, but the fella who plays the flick, he is just taken out, isn't he? It's a really Bruce Lee move on him, but because the play moves on beyond, and it's Rivera who scores the goal, it's kind of forgotten that the defender has just done a kamikaze leap at the Milan forward, because by today's reckoning, he would get a red card, a prison sentence, and he would be off to correctional facilities.
It's funny you should say that, Tim, because he did get a red card and he did get a prison sentence. But that the exception that proves the rule, I believe, because it wasn't. I think this was more common to get away with it than. But this was the biggest stage. This was. A World Cup final, almost. The Copa Intercontinental is now become the Club World Cup. So it essentially was the World Cup final for club teams back in those days. And to perform, vergüenza is the word in Spanish. It translates as embarrassment, shame, disgrace. Use which of those 3 words you will. But the dictator, I mean, he was a military dictator at the time, was embarrassed by the level of violence. But it also brought shame on Argentina. And Argentina had the World Cup 9 years later, and they were trying to protect their reputation somewhat. So that may well have played into it.
So Argentinians who are listening to this won't appreciate that we brought it up again, would they? They wouldn't appreciate that we're referencing, particularly after the last World Cup, where suddenly the world, if they hadn't already been aware of just how skillful and dynamic Argentinian football is, probably would have changed their mind with that World Cup. But we're going back to another Argentina, maybe. Is that fair? I know it's history and fair enough, but how do people there in Argentina regard that particular context of its football, where it was thought of as aggressive rather than skillful, maybe?
I think our mutual friend Marcela Moreirajo, for example, and many Argentinians think, she told me this at least when I was over there, they think it's a pity that we focus on the negative stuff, and I appreciate that. There's a lot of incidents in South American football that only come to light, or let's say people only focus on South American football when something ridiculous happens, and sometimes ignoring the quality. So that's a pity that we tend to focus on these extremes and often the negatives, because it does shed maybe it's unfair to shed just a negative light on these nations rather than also bringing the balance up a little bit. Argentina were denied the chance to win the World Cup before in the 40s, when the World Cups were cancelled because of the World Wars, the Second World War. So maybe we would have been focusing on other things. And there are lots of positive things in the book, I have to say. The River team of the 1940s, La Máquina, all the positive stuff. So there are positive things to focus on.
My whole point was to come back to the book in a way. It's because you are talking about the language of football in Argentina, you're actually, playing to its positive sides, because that's a way of entering into the conversation about Argentina and the remarkable achievements of what is a relatively population-wise small country in wiping the floor with the rest of the world when it comes to football and producing, players that. There's always that debate, Maradona, Pele, or whatever. And I can see, Maradona getting a big shout for that. It's not so surprising to hear people say it's Pele, partly not least because Brazil's such a huge country and has dominated football. Sorry, Tim, go on. You're going to correct me.
No, not at all.
Oh, no, but the point I was trying to make is that sometimes Argentina doesn't get its proper respect. I think your book aims to do that. And as Jonathan Wilson pointed out in the introduction, you had to search to find another landscape to talk about Argentinian football, didn't you? This, landscape that nobody else had really referenced.
Argentina is a very popular country. I think a lot of people dream of going there. There's a fascination with Argentinian football culture, I believe. At least I like to think so. I was certainly fascinated by it, living there for the 4 years that I did. But yeah, this is the idea just came to me off the back of the first book. It took me an awful long time to learn Spanish. I was living in Buenos Aires for the first 2 years without really understanding or being able to engage that much in the language. And then once I'd learned the language, I engaged with the city in a completely different manner. So this was a long process. The whole process was quite a long process. But as I say, all the football vocabulary over there is so rich that it dawned on me that this was a good way to use language as a vehicle to tell some of the best stories. And some are positive, some are negative, some are curious. But going back to your question about the aggression, I think a lot of people are ashamed. I think Argentinians, the majority of Argentinians would say that is not a good reflection on the society at the time, nor the 2018 final that had to be moved, Copa Libertadores, between River Plate and Boca Juniors, that it had to be moved to Madrid. There's also people that are ashamed of that reflection of their society, because as we know, this is not happening within football. It's a reflection of what's going on outside, right?
But as you followed it, no, you go ahead, Tim. Well, I was going to say, this is live. It's live and direct on YouTube. Okay, let me just make a final point off the back of that, being that for you who has followed Argentinian football, you mentioned your previous book there was Tears at the Bombonera, was it? Tears at the Bombonera.
Yeah. And this game happened in the Bombonera. Doesn't happen in the stadium of Estudiantes, which at the time is a tin pot little affair. It just shows what a small club they were. This is taken into the capital, to the Bombonera, to the stadium of Boca Juniors, where there's a kind of bear pit atmosphere as well that probably has an influence on events on the field.
Yeah, a very good point.
It's funny because it's called the Disgrace of La Plata, but it's not in La Plata, it's in Buenos Aires. And maybe the reason for that is you can't absolve Estudiantes from their part of that disgrace. You couldn't call it the Disgrace of La Bombonera because it had nothing to do with Boca Juniors. And actually 2 years later, there would be a game played at La Bombonera that Boca had to take responsibility for. There was an incredibly violent game 2 years later between Boca Juniors and the Peruvian club Sporting Cristal that ended in tragedy as well. I think there were arrests, prison sentences that weren't served, and in that case, it was 19 red cards. I think in 1968, there weren't yellow and red cards. 1969, I mean, the game that we're looking at. There weren't yellow and red cards quite yet, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe that played into the difficulty of managing the game, going back to an earlier question.
This game is sometimes in the narrative as seen as the end of Estudiantes. These people who had been billed, this workman-like team that had been billed as fine, upstanding young men, almost symbols of the new Argentina that the military government at that time was trying to create, and then suddenly they become a disgrace on the international scene, with everything that happens in this game, with some of the players ending up in prison and so on. But it's not the end of the Estudiantes story at all. No, the following year they win the Libertadores again, and the year after that they get to the final. So it's what happens here is right slap bang in the middle of these extraordinary years that no one would have predicted before. That this small, if you're from Buenos Aires, provincial club becoming the main continental force. Chris, some people in your situation kind of go native and embrace the whole thing, every extreme of Argentine football culture, as, in inverted commas, authentic. What relationship do you now have with football culture in Argentina?
I try to follow it very closely. The timing of the games is very difficult, being in the middle of the night. So I follow it objectively as I look at the results, and I catch highlights, and I catch a lot of the stories around the games. When I was over there, I had the chance of going to as many games as possible, and there's 50 to 60 grounds within an hour of Buenos Aires, which is part of the fascination and that people, I think, globally have for Buenos Aires in particular as a football mecca. And one of the charms is that all of the teams have their own grounds, whether it's a tin pot stadium in La Plata or if it's one of the big ones that most people have heard of. So you can really feel your boots when you're over there. Now, I'm incredibly, I say that I'm half Norwegian, half English, and half Argentinian. The maths doesn't quite go up; it doesn't work. But it's I'm very proud of being, in inverted commas, Argentinian.
Yeah, just to clarify, there are no three cheeks in a bum. Well, look, it's two halves of a whole, but three halves. Well, go and see a doctor about that. Tell me this though. Tell me this though, Chris. You know, when you follow Argentinian football so closely, and you write not one but two books about it, and you get more and more absorbed in it. You know, Tim was saying go native there, but you can't help but it belonging to your landscape, you know, your footballing landscape. How different, not difficult, but how much do you have to readjust yourself when you say, you know, watch Premier League football or any other football, from the intensity of, it's remarkable that stat, 50 to 60 stadiums within an hour of Buenos Aires. And like you said, and you captured the phrase perfectly, you can feel your boots. Yeah, I want my boots filling and all. That's just amazing. How much do you have to readjust to the somewhat comparatively pedestrian pace of football over this side?
I would say it's the other way around, actually. Younger people in Argentina are choosing to watch more Premier League. It's a lot more accessible. And they're lamenting the fact that their young players, their best talents, leave the continent. I guess it's true of other countries, maybe not so much Brazil. Well, it is true of Brazil, of course. But Brazil have good talents going there as well. Argentina, there's a generation of Argentinians from the 90s into the 2000s that grew up with some really good players that stayed longer than they are nowadays. Whereas some of River Plate's best talent, River Plate are probably the talent factory of Argentinian football at the moment. They're leaving at the age of 18. As soon as they turn 18, they're gone. And therefore, the eyes are drawn to European football. So it's a shame. The locals are now watching more Premier League. They're adopting more English vocabulary back into the language. It's almost gone full circle, whereas the English language was the language of football at the beginning. Then they developed their own language due to pride, due to national pride. This is our sport now. And it's now the dominance of the Premier League is introducing a lot more vocabulary back, English vocabulary back into the Argentinian game. But in terms of my going to the stadium in Argentina is a completely different experience than it is going to, I'm an Arsenal fan going to the Emirates or Ashburton Grove. It's like going to football in what would have been, I was born in 1985, so I didn't go to any games in the 70s and 80s, but I can imagine what it was like. I've heard elder statesmen like yourselves talk about it. And there are kind of, it's edgier. There are no away fans, so that threat of violence isn't there necessarily, but there's infighting within the barra bravas of a club. There are shots fired outside Argentinian grounds, not every week, luckily, but it does still happen. So there's an edginess. The stadiums aren't necessarily modern, let's say. There are incidents that remind you of Hillsborough, to say it directly. there are situations where they pack the stands with far too many people, and it can get quite scary in there. So that's not to glorify it in any way, shape or form, but we have a very sterilized version of football in the UK now, and maybe in Europe. Something in between the two would be nice. I would recommend.
That's fascinating. I mean, that really is really informative. I lived in Rio when they won the Libertadores in 2009, says Rough Raf. And thanks a lot for this text. Final against Cruzeiro was played in La Plata. Many Estudiantes fans.
That had a new stadium then, which and this is real Argentina, I think. So this new stadium, but they've got to share it with Gimnasia. Well, bollocks to that. So they've ended up spending more money to refurbish their old stadium. It's that idea which is very much part of English football culture as well. The stadium is the territory. A lot of South America doesn't have that so much because some of the stadiums are municipal. Like in Rio, we have the Maracanã, and the idea was that the Maracanã belong to everyone. But Argentina, no, you've got to have your own stadium. So this modern stadium that they had in La Plata, it opened something like 2003, something like that. Modern stadium where they played their first leg against Cruzeiro in 2009. They hated it. Because they had to share it with the other lot. They want their own place. They want their own gaff.
That's the idea of there's a concept called the narcissism or the small difference, which is it's quite homogeneous. The Argentinian, or certainly Buenos Aires, it's quite homogeneous in the sense that they're very similar. They have a very similar background. 80% of Argentinians come from Spanish or Italian, have Spanish or Italian blood, or both. So the football stadium, your colours, and the stadium being the hub of a neighbourhood, is that one thing that differentiates you from your neighbours, and that's why there's so much rivalry and such a fierce rivalry between the clubs as well. Obviously, they're being packed on top of each other in a city of 10 million, 15 million people. Doesn't help.
Yeah, it's funny how football fans kind of claim the ownership of a ground, don't they? You don't do that when you're a music fan. You don't go off and think, the Hammersmith Palais, that's ours, kind of thing. You can't do that. But with football, it's different. This other question. Oh, and by the way,
it's a good one.
The last text as well did suggest that the Estudiantes fans were proper nutters. I don't know if that's a phrase that
it applies to all of them across the board.
Yeah, but can you say in Spanish is the point of Christopher's book? I can't remember anyway, I'll come back to some of the phrases in the book in a moment. This other question, though, from Matthew: has Javier Milei's presidency caused many issues within Argentinian football specifically, or could issues rise in the future?
Part of the reason I chose this game is because Estudiantes is very current as well. They won one of the leagues. There are 2 league formats last season. They won one of them. The Argentina league is often divided into 2 half seasons or 2 league campaigns. So they're current champions, or at least they're current champions of the Copa de la Liga last season. And they've got Juan Sebastián Verón as the president, a name that we'll remember. He captained the side in 2009 when they won the Copa Libertadores, somewhat surprisingly.
And his father was the best player of this team back in the late 60s.
And scored at Old Trafford in 1968, the year before when they won the Copa Intercontinental. So it all comes together. Estudiantes at the moment are in bed with Foster Gillett, the son of Liverpool fans. Close your ears.
Yes, Tom Gillett.
Senior. No, George Gillett, wasn't it?
George Gillett.
George Gillett Jr. His son is Foster Gillett. He is investing money in South American football. He's not allowed to buy. You're not allowed to buy an Argentinian club. They're member-owned, member-run social democratic organizations that vote in a president. A lot of them have gone down the route of voting in former players, and Estudiantes have, Juan Sebastián Verón. And he is opening the door for private capital to come into his football club. It's not actually allowed. So they're trying to bend the rules. They're finding loopholes. They're doing it. It's not, let's see how it works in the long run. But Foster Gillett bought a club in Uruguay Rampla Juniors. They won the league in Uruguay in the 1920s. So let's call it a medium-sized club in Uruguay, because really there's only 2 big clubs in Uruguay and the rest are small. But he bought Rampla Juniors and immediately began buying players through Uruguay to loan to Estudiantes. So Estudiantes have picked up some talent that they normally wouldn't be able to afford with private capital. And Milei, being a neoliberal president, has passed decrees. When he came into power at the end of 2023, he passed one mega decree, as he called it, 366 laws that passed by democracy and went straight into being. And 2 of them are talking about the privatization of the football clubs in Argentina. So that's Milei, neoliberalism, Estudiantes. It could see Argentinian clubs being privatized to some extent in the future. And that won't be the bigger clubs because they have a very strong membership. It's more likely to be smaller clubs who want to compete with the bigger clubs. So Argentinian football is at a crossroads, and it's interesting to see what will happen.
Huge cultural resistance to this idea of having a private, because as Chris was saying, the club is a neighbourhood hub. You know, it is your club. You use the facilities. In terms of football being on the front line against him, this is interesting. Milei's politics is class war, and if you've got money now in Argentina, with the currency has become very strong, you can travel to Brazil for your holidays and you're laughing. If you haven't, I mean, consumption has fallen every month since he's become president. Consumption is falling. So this is worrying. And some of the people who are absolutely feeling the pinch of the austerity are the pensioners. So there's been demonstrations of pensioners against the government. Now, many years ago, Diego Maradona once said, "I'm with the pensioners all the way." And that phrase, football fans have kind of caught onto that phrase, especially because, remember, Milei is a libertarian. The state has no purpose at all. But like all of these all of these phonies, he is utterly dependent on the forces of repression of the state. And so his police force and so on have been beating up these demonstrators, and they beat up a fella in a football shirt. And that was a kind of reminder for society and football fans of what Maradona said about being being together with the retired people. So the organised groups of football fans have been going out protesting against the government together with retired people. The government now finally seems to be finding some political will to take on these organised groups of fans. That there's never been the political will to do that ever. So they are very interesting times, but very worrying times, I think, for Argentina at the moment, because it's not, it's no longer a rich country to start with. And imagining consumption falling every month for 15 months.
And going back to this idea of being proud of being Argentinian without, I only lived there for 4 years. When I see these kind of reactions to neoliberal policies, and as Tim says, a pensioner with a football shirt, it was a Chacarita Juniors shirt. It went viral. The football fans said, well, one thing is the Maradona quote, you'd have to be a coward not to defend retired people, is the phrase translated. The other phrase they used is, we're all going to be pensioners one day. So it's not a fight that affects us today, but we're going to go to the streets. And it's that activism. There's a social conscience in Argentina. And they're not afraid to fight. So that's one of the things that I find I'm quite proud about that. When they were fighting for equality and there's a femicide in Argentina every 30 hours. It's this statistic. And they're trying to legalize abortion, and there are other issues that they're trying to get the state, which is still connected with the church, to kind of change the policies. There were 300,000 young people outside Congress a few years ago using football songs, applying them to politics, to their cause. And it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, because we don't see that very much certainly in the UK and in Norway. We're quite passive certainly compared to the Argentinians.
Yeah, the response of British fans to the Super League is a little bit similar, but it's something in football. It's why David Goldblatt, his next book is on football as a last bastion of collectivity in many places. But so Argentina can be a bit like that, the reaction of the English football fans against the Super League, but on political matters such as austerity measures affecting pensioners.
Yeah, it wasn't until you mentioned a little while ago, Chris, that you were born in 1985. That it wasn't until you mentioned that that I suddenly realised why you were offering another option to our musical aspects of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. Because who would not want to go through the charts of 1969? So, as Paul has just done, 1969, let's set the scene. Apollo 9 saw Neil Armstrong land on the moon. Ciran was found guilty of killing Robert Kennedy. I mean, couldn't deny it, could he? And John Lennon and Yoko Ono held a bed in for peace. Now,
I think there's something even more significant to our story, which is just about to happen. And that is, we're only a few weeks away from Altamont.
it's significant, yeah, very significant in terms of it was a Rolling Stones concert in California. Rolling Stones unwisely hired Hell's Angels to be the security guards, and the Hell's Angels are the drug dealers at all these places, and you know they carry a lot of weapons with them. And there was a young black guy who was sitting on some speakers, from what I understand, and there was some kind of altercation, and the young it did change a lot. It politicized a lot of people.
It was the end of the 60s as well, isn't it? It's part of that.
Yeah.
That's what the Don McLean American Pie song is all about. You know, it all builds.
Sometimes, you know, you have to look at the politics and think, even if the politics wasn't the end of the 60s, calendar-wise, it is the end of the 60s. It's 1969. And it always, at the end of a decade, always fills us with a certain amount of trepidation.
Danny out with Nail and I. The greatest decade in the history of mankind is coming to an end.
Well,
and as presuming Ed,
now you're sounding like Donald Trump.
We have failed to paint it black.
Yes. Thank you for the quote as well. But look at the charts, mate. I mean, John and Yoko staying in bed naked for a week to protest against war in a hotel in Amsterdam. The song that they must have had going around in their head at that time is the #1 song here. Sugar. Dun, 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 dun. I know you purists don't take it seriously, Chris, because it was manufactured in the studio, not as much as songs are manufactured today. You know, at least they were playing real instruments rather than programmed instruments. But yeah, they weren't a real band as such. They were like a session band put together by a producer, like Harry J, because Harry J and the All-Stars is in this chart as well, amongst other things. But it's a brilliant chart, isn't it, Chris? Even for a youngster like yourself.
Fascinating.
I cringed when I saw the #1 because I realised I was going to have it stuck in my head for the next 2 months or so.
It's an earworm.
But the rest of the tracks are fantastic. All tracks that I've heard of, you know, that I'm familiar with. So I've made a playlist. I'm listening to it. It's good.
It's an amazing
What are your favourites? What stands out for you as someone who was born 16 years later?
I don't want to offend you, but I like Bob. I've always liked Bob Dylan. So
offended me?
No, not offended.
Not
but
offending
you
not offending me.
No, not at all.
And Lay Lady Lay is actually one of his best tracks, I think, at #9. Yeah. A Boy Named Sue, Johnny Cash. That's my generation. We just found that fascinating. You know, innocent. We're 9-year-olds. It's the end of the swinging 60s, which passed us by. We were too young to take part in it. There's some bloke called Johnny Cash does a recording from a prison called Folsom, where he sings a song about a boy named Sue. And I'm telling you what, that was the earworm for us. I mean, Sugar Sugar as well, but Boy Named Sue, the story in it, it's at #10. Space Oddity at #6. I remember there's a kid called Raymond Tusher. I was at school with. This would have been when I went to secondary school when I was 11. So a couple of years after this, he was like a David Bowie fan. through and through and through and through and through. And he looked like Adebayo from that time. He's a brilliant footballer. I was thinking about him the other day, you know, the kind of footballers of our generation that we went to school with who were never scouted. And, you know, they were great at school. But the most important song in the top 10 is Je t'aime, Moi non plus by Jane Birkin and Serge Gainsbourg. For my generation, we didn't know what it meant. We didn't have a clue. You looked in all your French phrase books from school and it didn't say Je t'aime, Moi non plus. But we kind of knew it was not for us. So, well, we couldn't get enough of it.
Adult shelf only. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, do you need to know the title? You would have listened to it, Chris. Do you need to know, even a youngster like yourself, do you need to know the title, or does the content give away the title? If you see what I mean?
Yeah, luckily, I don't speak well enough French. I think I've heard you discussing it on the World Football Phone-In many times. It's popped up there as may well have heard it for the very first time there.
Mate, it's my generation, like I said. Good question you put to Chris, Tim. What's your favourite in the charts then, Tim?
I find it such a fascinating era because that the mid-'60s band, the Beatles have gone now, haven't they? You know, they've effectively split up. I think Let It Be is still going to come out, but they're gone. The Stones are probably right at their peak. They're in the charts here with Honky Tonk Woman, which I don't think is their best. But the Stones for a while were chasing the Beatles with the psychedelic thing. And then they came out of that and they kind of realized they were a blues band. And their best work, like Gimme Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil, and just at this point, Street Fighting Man, they've got their finger on the pulse. You can feel the pre-Altamont in the music. You can feel that there's something disturbing about Gimme Shelter and Sympathy for the Devil and so on. And then afterwards, they're forced into tax exile and they'll never have their finger on the pulse quite the same way again. There's lots of things going on. There's a big blues revival. Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Oh, well. It's epic. It's fantastic. It's Peter Green. It's like Bethnal Green Jew and hippie, late 60s hippie, all together and a fabulous guitar player as well. So I think that's wonderful. It's a really interesting time from the point of view of black music. When one of my favourites, Too Busy Thinking About My Baby, Marvin Gaye.
It's amazing.
But it already sounds a bit retro. When it was a song, this is 69. It was a song that was first cut. You know, Motown used to cut their songs on lots of artists. It was first cut by the Temptations 3 years earlier. And so when it comes out in 69, it's gorgeous. But him and Stevie Wonder, who's in the charts with My Cherie Amour, they're just about to shake the whole thing up, aren't they?
I was going to say, no, apologies, Stevie, go ahead.
Yeah, Stevie's about to go in his own direction. And Marvin Gaye is about to do What's Going On and really shake the thing up with a big influence from the themes of white rock music as well. So those things are getting shaken up, and lots of reggae. The Trojan Records must be making a fortune because it's the big breakthrough for that style of music as well, isn't it?
100%. I'll come to the reggae in a second. In terms of the black music,
sorry. Cloud Nine. The Temptations are in there with Cloud Nine, which was hugely controversial, even in the group. No, because Norman Whitfield is now making them spokesman for a new druggy generation, and they're all drugged up on Cloud Nine. And the lyrics, my father didn't know the meaning of work. He disrespected mother and treated her like dirt. They got to sing that, and they got to then go back home and see their folks. So there was real tension in the Temptations because that Norman Whitfield was turning them into a voice for a druggy generation.
Yeah, well, same thing. Biggie Smalls' mum, who hails from Jamaica, said that, that line about, Christmas missed us. No, that never happened. These lines are important. You go home, you got to face your parents. It ain't just the line of a pop song. I was going to say about My Cherie Amour, probably the one track that has lasted the passage of time almost, unsullied, because Hear it now. It still sounds as Chris as it sounded all that time ago. I'm shocked, actually. It's from 1969, because I tend to think of it about 1975, 76, because it kept coming back to the clubs. It kept coming back to the discos. It never, ever went away. And it's still there. And it's his version. There is a reggae version of it, which is beautiful, and other versions of it, but it's his version. And even though Tim is right saying, look, we're looking at the end of that Motown period, it's the end of the decade in many different ways.
But it's still great. I mean,
Actually,
Junior Walker, what does it take?
Yeah, but
has there ever been a sweeter song than What Does It Take by Junior Walker?
Yeah, possibly. But when I told you what the sweetest song was, you went on and you didn't believe that Smokey could carry it off. If it had been John Lennon, it would have been carried off well, but not Smoking. You know the song that I'm talking about as well. Anyway, but the reggae, important. Very quickly, I'll say this about this. A lot of people say that the heyday of reggae was 1976, 75, 76, 77. No, this was the real heyday of Jamaican music. We'd never heard anything like this. I think it was Jar Wobble. It might, no, maybe not Jar Wobble. I heard it described by some white person, either from the punk era or from the skinhead era, saying that it sounded like music from outer space. And it did. There was absolutely nothing like the music. Some of the reggae music you've got in the chart, even today. I mean, let's put Jimmy Cliff's Wonderful World, Beautiful People aside, which I think is probably the best of the longest lasting of the reggae songs. Is it? Well, no, let me put that aside. It is a normal kind of like pop song. Liquidator, Harry J. All-Stars. Even today, when they play at the Chelsea football ground at Stamford Hill, it still sounds like a sound from space. Max Romeo's Wet Dream, and he insists.
Oh, yes. How did he get away with that?
It got to #1. It was banned by the BBC. He insists that it was about he was living in a tenement yard. And there was a hole in his corrugated iron roof, and it was a rainy day, and he was trying to push something in to stop the flow of rainwater.
We're not convinced, are we?
Yeah, no, particularly when the refrain is "Let me push it in, baby,"
Indeed.
or something. Anyway, that aside, the Pioneers' Long Shot Kick the Bucket. We never heard anything. It's music from outer space, mate. That's how we.
Neil Armstrong brought it back with him. Maybe that's it.
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe. But big shout! The Upsetters, Return of Django. How could I forget that? Number 17. Oh my word! Everything that Lee Perry touched at this period, and it came out of the album. Was it the Blackboard Jungle album? I can't remember. I think Return. No, not the Return of Super 8. I think it was from the Super 8 album. This Return of Django. It could have been Return of Super Ape as well, because it's called Return of Django. I don't know, but it still sounds like music from a different dimension. And just to wrap up this conversation, for me, Chris, and it's expressed in your book as well, the reason we love Argentinian football is its inventiveness. It feels like they're playing football on a different planet than the rest of us. In those magical moments, I've never in my life watched a dull Argentinian national team game. I don't think it was dull for whatever reasons. And long may that continue. For those who don't know, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that that style of football, the intensity that Argentinians have, I think it's really appreciated by English fans at the moment. Look at the Argentinians at Tim's club. Lisandro Martinez at United, Enzo Fernandez, they play with an intensity that maybe the richer English players have kind of thought, I've already made it. I don't need to fight for it anymore. I think
can you have that without the excesses of the Estudiantes in '69? Can you have that intense will to win without always the possibility of it sliding into disgrace?
It does boil over even with that lot. The mod. I mean, that's one thing I really don't like about Argentinian football: the gamesmanship and some of the extremes. I mean, Guti Romero at Tottenham could be sent off twice every 90 minutes. I think some of the games that I've seen.
Youthful enthusiasm, sir.
But again, finding something in between the Argentinian thing and the Premier League would work. the goalkeeper, Emiliano Dibu, as they call him, Martinez.
Yeah.
He also
he's getting a bit
toes the line right to the, and it's adorable. And if he plays for your team and he's fighting for your colours, you love it. Robbie Savage was like that, and nobody liked him apart from Blackburn and Derby fans.
Yeah, Robbie Savage is slightly different. I think Martinez, unless your team is playing against him, because I think for the neutral, he's got a bit of a swagger about him. The commentators always say, whatever he does, whether he's wasting time because they're 1-0 ahead or whatever, they will always say World Cup winning Emilio Martinez. And he just carries that swagger like, yeah, I knew you were going to say that. So this is me. I'll take my time. I'm a World Cup winner. And I think as a neutral, is much more fascinating to observe.
Do you think is there this is a question, it's not a statement. Do you think he might be forcing his Argentine-ness as a result of really playing all his football and growing up as a footballer in England?
Very possibly. I think maybe it makes him feel even more Argentinian, being abroad. Messi, maybe it's a result also of Messi's the Messi experience, which is being criticised for not being Argentinian. He's a robot. He's Catalan. Lionel Messi was always criticised for not performing for Argentina, and therefore he couldn't be Argentinian. He didn't wear his heart on his sleeve. He didn't criticise. He didn't get sent off. He didn't, and it's only when he kind of switched on that Argentinianness, Lionel Messi, and whether it was conscious or whether he just grew up, became an older man and took more responsibility. But he is now obviously one of them, but he never was. And that was part of the winning and losing balance. Had they lost the World Cup final, it remains, we'll never know, but how they would have treated Messi after a loss against France. But I think Martinez is just a very genuine character, and he gets away with it because he's a World Cup winner. I think had he been playing for, I'm not going to mention a club, but had he been playing for a club that's not doing so well. I wasn't.
I know what you're not saying. I know.
No, I wasn't actually going there because my brother and my nieces are listening and they're Tottenham fans, so I'm not allowed to. But let's say he'd been playing for Manchester United and it's not going particularly well, and he had that attitude. It wouldn't be quite as charming. Let's just say.
Well, thank you very much. You've been absolutely generous with your time, and you've taken us through. And even I learned something today on this podcast. You see, you always learn on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. Who knew that Eni Martinez wasn't really that Argentinian? I always thought he was. I thought
he's been in England since he was 18. You
don't think about that.
He was at the Arsenal long enough to qualify for a pension without ever playing.
Yeah. You always remind us.
I think he was 16 when he came to Arsenal, and he played probably 10 games in 10 years. And then the COVID Cup final, the FA Cup final against Chelsea, that's when we saw the real side of him. He was on FaceTiming his parents in Argentina who couldn't go to the game, crying his eyes out, and we fell in love with him. And then he was sold. And then every time he was asked about Arsenal, he was maybe a little bit too honest. And Arsenal fans have got their backs up off the back of that. And that's that tribal thing again. I think it's ridiculous because I quite like him as, being half Argentinian. I really like Martinez. But Arsenal fans have got their back up a little bit with him seemingly criticising the club. But I adore him. I don't like some of the antics, but I adore him.
3 is the magic number.
Indeed. So if Martinez is criticising Arsenal, not happy with Arsenal, then in the words of Diana Ross, the Supremes and the Temptations, I second that emotion.
And in the words of Tim Vickery, 3 cheeks do not make an arsenal. 3 cheeky comments, 3 goals, 3 cheeky goals. They were amazing goals.
I made sure I was on my way to a game during the Arsenal game. Yeah. In order to pretend that it would, this, as Gil Scott Heron said, come on, this can't be real.
It is real. Just a quick word on that, because we're doing this podcast on the day after Arsenal had a remarkable, if unexpected, victory against Real Madrid. It wasn't just the scoreline, Chris. It was the way in which those goals hit the back of the net, not least the 2 free kicks by Damien Rice. Declan Rice. What did I say? Damien Rice. Oh, is that an actor? Damien Lewis is the actor's. Apologies. Declan Rice. I do know because I watched all the adverts for Rice Baby for Mother Rice. Anyway, those who live in London will know what I'm talking about in that respect. But just the way that those free kicks were taken, it was amazing, wasn't it? It wasn't. That's not Arsenal. That's like, it's like one of the best or the best team in Europe right now.
Well, I'm phoning. Obviously, I'm in Oslo at the moment, Norway. I'm incredibly proud of having Martin Ødegaard in Norwegian in the team.
You pronounced it correctly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Takk så mycket. And
Varsågod.
He's been standing over the free kicks as long as he's been at Arsenal, and he's, I had another player that I adore. Why have we just discovered that Rice can hit the ball that well? I mean, amazing. He does it from the corner flag and whips it in under the crossbar so well. It's incredible to think that I haven't tried to apply that to a direct free kick yet. But
I blame Brazil.
He's standing over everything.
I blame Brazil, because Brazil, they would love Ancelotti to be free so they could appoint him as coach. Right. So if Real Madrid go out, if Real Madrid go out next week, then Ancelotti could be free very, very soon. So my conspiracy theory here is that Brazil applied all of its free kick expertise to teach Declan Rice how to do it.
Well, you're getting onto the topic of superstition, which obviously it seems like we're running out of time. But in Argentina, superstition in football is incredibly important. And I'll just tie it up. There's one phrase, Kabbalah, which is a lucky charm. And the game was late here. It starts at 9:00 in Norway. Had an early shift this morning, so I had to watch it at home. But I phoned my best friend from England. We were trying to align the streams because he's watching on his television. I'm watching on an Argentinian stream. We have to try and align them so we're watching them together. But I was 1 second ahead. As he lined up for the first free kick, I put mute on my telephone so that I could celebrate. If he scored, I could celebrate without him ruining the goal for him. Mm-hmm. 10 minutes later, when he's lining up for the second free kick, I thought, well, this worked well the first time. This is now going to be like a lucky charm, my Kabbalah. Put myself on mute, top corner. So now I think we have a new routine.
It's down to you. It's down to you, actually. I'll let Declan Rice know as well. No need for him to do the sign of the cross or whatever his superstition might be. It's all down to making sure that you put your phone on mute. Listen, on that note, we do have to say thank you very much. The book is Dame Bola. Dame Bola, give me the ball. Don't be taking the mickey. Or give me the platform to speak, as we do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. It's a journey through the language of Argentinian football by Chris Hylland, who's with us now. What a fascinating journey. There's more to talk about this. Part 1 is done. Welcome back anytime, and let's pick up on it on another occasion.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody indeed. Thanks to everybody who took time out to join us live and direct here on YouTube. And do remember to subscribe as well, both here on YouTube and your podcast apps. Look forward to reconvening next Wednesday at 4:00, Tim.
See you there.
Make sure you wear something appropriate.
Italian knitwear.